People of Reddit who've heard deathbed confessions, what were some of the most interesting ones? My great-grandmother lived a very long and interesting life. She was in her 20s during the Great Depression. She had a bit of a wild streak from those days that we don't know much about, to the point that we actually don't know our great-grandfather's name, just the husband she took later. Over the course of her nearly 100-year life, she had collected owls, literally thousands of owl figurines. She had clocks, wall hangings, pot holders, lamps, stained glass art, salt shakers, and more little figurines than you could imagine, all depicting owls. We all wondered the importance of the owls. She never talked about them, we just all knew she loved owls. Well, when she was nearing death at the age of 98 or 99, and the docs said that she had only a few days left, my grandparents went and talked to her, and they asked if she had anything that she wanted to share before she goes. She thought for a moment, then said, "I never understood the owls." It turns out, she didn't really give a shit about owls. Near as we could piece together, sometime in the 40s or 50s perhaps, she either bought a trivet or a couple of salt and pepper shakers that were owls. Then someone got her some others. Those were the oldest owls that anyone could remember seeing, but from there, someone got her an owl to match, probably a pot holder or a placemat, and all of a sudden her kitchen was owl-themed. From there, it snowballed. The owls flowed like wine, baffling her for 60 years, eventually taking over as the bulk of her personal belongings. The moral is, if you're not actually into something, mention it early. My grandma suffered from dementia for many years before she passed. It got so bad that she didn't remember who her family were, and would barricade herself in her room because she was scared of everyone. She even forgot she smoked, and would find her cigarettes months later after forgetting where they were, and claim that she was desperate for one. She'd put them away after one, and that would be her again for months. The only memories she really had left at the end was that her sister used to be able to play the piano beautifully, and her husband, her childhood sweetheart, was gone, but she didn't know where. In reality, he'd passed away sometime earlier. She spent her days waiting for him to come home from wherever he was. "My John will be home soon," she would say, or someone would walk past the window and she'd double take and say, "Thought that was my John." It was heartbreaking watching her deteriorate until she was on her deathbed, unaware of anything or anyone. I went to say my goodbyes to her in the hospital, and she held my hand and told me how much she loved me, and how she was going to be with John now. In that moment, she remembered who I was, what was happening to her, and that her husband, my granddad, was already gone. She went in her sleep not long after that, and I'm forever thankful I managed to say goodbye and tell her how much I loved her. Not my story, but that of a hospice worker who spoke to my class. For those who don't know, hospice is a method of end-of-life care that focuses on alleviating the emotional and physical pain of a dying person to ease their passing rather than combating their imminent death. One of her patients was a bedbound woman in her 90s who was generally unresponsive, but had flashes of recognition and engagement. It's hard to gauge the level to which unresponsive patients are detached from their surroundings, so they encourage family members to come keep them company in the hopes of soothing the patient. Now, this patient was from a U.S. state that prided itself on its state university and the university's football team. This woman's family had attended this university for 4 or 5 generations. During her hospice care, however, her great-granddaughter was the first in their family to decide to go to a different school, the rival state's university, in fact. Her family was supportive of her decision, but often joked about her being the rebel, or what have you. One day, they were all sitting around the woman's bedside, teasing the girl about her decision. Suddenly, the patient sat up, looked at her great-granddaughter, said traitor, and died. Damn, kid must have gone to an Oklahoma university to deserve something that harsh. I was thinking it was an Alabama family with an Auburn University defector to spark such hostility. I'm sure there are other such harsh rivalries, but that one runs deep. My partner's grandfather never spoke about his World War II service. We're Australian. He joined after lying about his name and age, so we can't find any records. He would have been 16. We do know that he was in the Pacific somewhere when he got his lie exposed, because he was then 18 and was drafted under his real name, and promptly arrested. He would do anything to not get sent back to fight. He got drunk, fought, and self-harmed. His adult life was spent mostly as an alcoholic, and being a shit husband and father, though in his later years he was able to make some good. Grandkids appearing, I guess, softened him. In his dying hours, he relived his time at war, and he would often say things like, "Oh God, they're here. Help, medic, "They're all around us. They're behind us, sir," and things like that. He also had a string of names he kept saying. Such a tortured, broken mind. I worked in a hospital in a small town near Munich for the last 14 years. My job there was not fancy at all. I move people around, throw the trash out, and occasionally take care of some handiwork like fixing a leaky shower head and stuff like that. As you can imagine, I get to see a lot of patients that come and go. And I remember a few instances of people confessing to me their biggest regrets. One example was an old Polish woman told me that she regretted not going to bed with Adolf, I'm sure you can guess who she's referring to, when she had the chance. I wanted to ask her more about context, but I was afraid, to be honest. Another time, I had a lady tell me that she used to work the streets during World War II, and that she slept with very high-up people in the government. She told me that she didn't regret that part of her life, but that she couldn't tell anyone, and that was a very heavy emotional drag. It was a rather odd and interesting time in my life, to be honest. My dad had a special ability to gain people's trust, in a good way. Twice now, he's had instances where dying people tell him things that they feel they can't tell their family. The one case I'll share is when my aunt's mother-in-law was dying. She explained to my dad that her husband cannot live alone, and that they both agreed that he must find a new partner after she passes. He did. He remarried within a year of her passing, at the age of 81. The family was very upset about him moving on so fast. My dad had to stand up for him and reassure him that that's what his late wife wanted. My grandfather had a pretty terrible case of dementia, and he kept making deathbed confessions as he knew he didn't have much time left. They were often about witnessing a murder and not telling anyone, but each time he confessed to us, the details changed. It happened a couple of times a day over the course of his final week. We finally figured out that he would watch the local news and hear about these things happening, then would think that he'd actually witnessed them. I didn't see it, but my aunt watched her elderly mother fall down the stairs, and confessed to her just before dying that she wasn't her biological mother. She told my aunt that her oldest sister was actually her mother. The sister had gotten pregnant too young, and the mom said that it was hers, which was a common way of handling it back then. She revealed that in her very last breath. My great-uncle actually confessed to having 2 illegitimate sons right before he kicked the bucket in front of his own children and grandchildren. The crazy thing was that none of his children knew of this. Not even my great-aunt knew about it, because she would have made a huge fuss if she was alive at the time to have known about it. What was crazier was that these 2 sons already passed away 5 and 7 years ahead of him respectively. He was 98 years old, and his invisible sons were 65 and 69. The children found out that one of his invisible sons was actually a teacher at a school that his granddaughters attended when they were in high school. Nevertheless, his children decided to reach out to the children of the invisible sons. They got connected and learned some stuff about my great-uncle. Craziest thing was that I actually dated one of the granddaughters of the invisible sons. Talk about a few degrees of separation. Jeez. A couple days before my grandmother passed away, she was really confused and was talking about my mother having a child a year or so after my own birth that was sent for adoption. She was talking about how sad and horrible this was, and that I deserved to know. After my grandmother passed, I confronted my mom about this, and she denied it, and I truly believed her. A couple of months later, it turns out my grandmother was the one adopting away a baby girl who was born between my mother and aunt. Not a deathbed confession exactly. I was a hospice worker and worked with a man who had a brain tumor. He was in pretty good shape except for that. He was going nuts in the nursing home, and one day I took him for a ride around town. He'd grown up there. Seemed like every other block he would point at an old building and say, "Used to be a bathhouse there." Or point at an empty lot and say, "That place had a pretty good bathhouse." Or, "There was a bathhouse there till it burned down." We passed by this old, odd-looking apartment building that had more doors than it should have, and some were sealed up. He said, "That used to be a crib, and each door had a small room behind it. Each woman of the night had her own room." We passed under a railroad bridge. He pointed at a flat area and said, "There used to be a black woman there that ran the best bathhouse in the state, right there." I finally laughed and said, "Guess I know what you spent your youth doing." This was in Great Falls, Montana, so I think I can believe it. Back in the day, a lot of cowboys, loggers, mining types, and probably not a lot of women. It could just be a foggy memory from a mind that wasn't working so well, but honestly was kind of a fun drive. I wasn't there to witness her confession, but the story leading up to it is fairly intriguing. My mom was adopted, and my grandparents never kept it a secret. They loved my mom like their own. When she was growing up, she tried to find out as much as she could about her and her adopted brother's birth parents. Back in those days, though, info like that wasn't the easiest to find. My mom and uncle were brought to the orphanage with little to no info on each of their biological parents. Eventually, my mom found enough info from notes she had gathered, like which families might have been most likely to be related to her, some property info one can find at the library, stuff like that, and she just sort of pieced this puzzle together over her life. At a certain point, she was able to get the names of her mother and her brother's mother. She was able to find out she was part of a big family, with lots of brothers and sisters. But for my uncle, he found out that his mother had died not long after placing him for adoption. By the time she had gathered all of his info and found this much out, my mom was married, had an older sister, and was pregnant with me. I can't remember exactly what it was she found that led to it, or if she heard something from someone, but she got a phone number. That phone number went to the house of her biological mother. She called, and the voice of a young boy answered. My mom asked for the name that she knew, and she hears, "Yeah, 1 second. Hey mom, phone's for you." My mom and her mom talk. It wasn't an easy conversation, and I'm just going to refer to my mom's mom as BioGran from here. BioGran is not comfortable with my mom contacting her, at all. She doesn't ask my mom a lot of questions, but my mom says that she was just going to talk, and if BioGran wanted to hang up at any point, she could. My mom just gave her a short version of the story of her life, and then the conversation was over. BioGran after that would send letters to my mom occasionally, but BioGran made a point of telling my mom she would never be found out by the rest of the family. BioGranny carried this secret with her until the day of her death. At some point, one of her daughters asked her if they'd tell them where she went and why she went away that one time, and BioGranny finally confessed. She had gone to a home for unwed mothers all those years ago to have my mom, the child of her affair. I met 2 of my biological aunts, and sadly both of them passed away a few years ago. But man, my biological grandmother had an affair with a milkman, left to go to a home for unwed mothers, had a child, and did not tell her family until her deathbed. Not a confession, but a denial and some solid information that helped us clear a few pending matters. I worked for a federal law enforcement agency. We covered major felonies, some of which relate to organized crime. Not mafia per se, but open-ended criminal enterprises. We had a mid-level player as a suspect for a string of cargo thefts, robberies, and other things. Knew him for years. Arrested him several times. He taunted us a fair bit. Lung cancer got a hold of him before we could build a solid case. Things went downhill fast. I went to see him at his home just before he transferred to hospice, knowing full well that he did at least 50% of what we suspected. I knew it, and he knew it, and it was a bit of an open secret. For whatever reason, he chose to give me a break. He said, "If I give you something, will you sit on it for a few weeks?" Initially, I wasn't able to agree. What if he was going to leak something that was currently in progress? But he assured me that it could wait, so I agreed. He told me that I knew I was looking at him for a particular crime, and that he didn't do it. He admitted wanting to do it, and told me who was responsible and where we could find solid evidence to implicate 5 or 6 people. Why did he tell me? He said the other guy never treated anybody right. I didn't ask him to elaborate. I moved on the info about 3 weeks later, right after the informant died. And I never actually had to share my source because he pointed us to a substantial amount of corroborating info. My great-aunt passed away a couple of years ago. She was suffering from viral encephalitis and fluctuated in and out of consciousness. It was quite painful to watch, although a lot of the family tended to be around her in those last days. I once happened to be alone with her when she made some fairly odd remarks, which I've kept to myself ever since. On the day in question, I was playing games on my phone in her hospital room, when she started to audibly mutter to herself. It became more urgent and intense. Eventually, she explicitly called me to her side. Her eyes looked huge and confused. I doubt she knew who I was. She spat out her words, most of which were barely comprehensible, putting particular emphasis on boy and ingredient. I sat there for 15 minutes listening to her erratic account of, as I finally gathered, how she sometimes used to cook eggs in the urine of a stable boy instead of water. She insisted that he was handsomely compensated for his services, but now and then she started to cry and couldn't stop. I googled this weeks later, and there indeed exists a traditional dish in China described in the West as virgin boy egg. Apparently, this concept had fascinated her, and she frequently recreated this herself and served it to her family, which sometimes included my younger self, without explaining what it was. I am not sure if she felt shame or enthusiasm about this, as she was stammering about it being a secret ingredient or something, but it quite obviously haunted her towards the very end of her life. So guys, that's it for today. And just quickly to address the big gap between videos there, I just finished moving cities and starting a brand new job, so that's been a bit of a learning curve. And YouTube's kinda gone on the back burner because of that. But I'm hoping to get back in the saddle here and start posting again on a consistent basis. With that said, I'm ReddList. I hope you have a great rest of your day, take care of yourself, and I will see you next time.
Inventory is full. Whoosh! Make another deposit!